Hi there, and welcome to this episode of the Guns Magazine podcast. I'm your host and the editor of Guns Magazine, Brent T. Thanks for joining us here on one of the world's biggest gun talk programs as we chat with the interesting folks who make up the world of shooting. Well, my guest today is Roy Huntington. We were discussing something the other day. We got a press release that a major gun company has brought somebody in from the outside to serve as one of their executives, and that may be a great fit, or it may not be. And both Roy and I have seen this many, many times where a gun company brings in somebody that is not necessarily a shooter and doesn't understand the industry, and things don't go well. So that's why we are going to talk about the three things we've seen, which are a quick way to kill a gun company. And if you're a member of the shooting public, this is important for you because you need to understand how you can support these companies and make sure that they're doing the right thing. And if you're part of the gun industry itself, well, hopefully this will be a cautionary tale as you're looking at replacing folks within your hierarchy. So before we do that, of course, make sure you like and subscribe the podcast. That's how we keep bringing it to you every week. And we're bringing a new sponsor on board this month, Armscore. So here's a quick word about Armscore, and then we'll talk to Roy Huntington.
The STK series blends the advantages of a striker-fired pistol with everything you love about your 1911. The STK 100 Ultra has an updated frame with more aggressive side grip panels and checkered front and back straps. But we didn't stop there. You'll see that the optic footprint is now larger, which means even more options for your favorite red dot. The new STK from Rock Island Armory. Experience the power and precision of the Rock today. For more info, visit armscore.com.
Well, hey, Roy, welcome back to the podcast. And today we're going to do a disservice to the shooting industry. We're going to talk about how you can destroy a gun company in 3 easy steps. Okay?
Boy, and have we seen it.
Yeah. Well, the genesis of today's topic, and again, today's topic was something Roy came up with, but he was absolutely right. There was a press release this week. We're going to try to avoid naming names because, yeah, we still have to work in this industry, and we still like a lot of these folks. But a major firearms company announced a hiring of a new important person in their executive offices. And it bragged about how this person is going to change the brand and onward and upward and this and that. And the person has a background, I think, selling lawnmowers and feminine hygiene products and, fertilizer. And I don't know this person at all. And we know a lot of the industry folks do watch this podcast. And if you know who I'm talking about, my apologies. The guy may be just a really solid guy and an expert shooter and hunter and all that. But I'm guessing not. And that was Roy's point that, look, they're going to start down that death spiral we've seen so many times. So we're going to talk about that today. And if you are an industry insider, maybe we can point out some things that need to be pointed out, and you can avoid that in the future. So, Roy, I already identified a couple things. The one we've already talked about is hiring outside folks. The second thing is the leaving of the founder, whether it's by death or retirement or whatever, or venture capital, and that's an unsung one. But let's get started with the one you just talked about, this great company, one of the best companies, I think, in terms of just the corporate culture, the company, their gun, just deep-rooted sense of shooting and love for firearms, and they're hiring outside people now. So what do you think about that?
Well, I think it's okay.
Sure.
But it's got to be the vetting process. And what I see happen is, and I used to see it when I was a policeman, we had what are called field training officers. Mm-hmm. And so when I started, there were training officers who had been policemen for 15 and 20 years and had basically gone up through the ranks, had made countless felony arrests, encountered every situation you could think of. And this was the guy I was learning from. Well, you'll learn a lot, Yeah. Which means then when I become a training officer, then I can pass that information on, add my new information. Well, as time went by, there was a hiring frenzy. And it got to the point that we were running out of these seasoned training officers. My third phase training officer had been on for 14 months.
Oh, no.
And so then now if you continue that trend, so you have those training officers doing trainees who then after 12 months are put in to be a training officer because of this huge hiring, frenzy.
Yeah.
What you have here is you have this loss of corporate knowledge, in our industry and in the police world. And then you have trainers training trainees who don't really have experience doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Yep.
And it's a vicious cycle, and then eventually you get people who really don't know what it's like to be a real policeman.
Yeah.
They know how to do whatever it was the last guy who had a year on the police department knew how to do. What I see in the industry is you have the person who founds the company, and he is or she is a passionate person. If it's a shooting company, I'm sure they're a shooter, they're a gun owner, they love it, and the reason they're doing it is because they love it, not because they think they're going to make money. That's almost incidental sometimes.
Exactly.
So historically, those people build the company. Then, if they're fortunate, they hand off to someone in their family, a son or daughter, who grew up in the culture, right? And they're passionate too. And so then now they grow the company. We see that within different companies in the industry. And now is when the critical thing happens. They pass off to the third generation. And now I've seen too many times the third generation has more of a sense of obligation than a sense of real desire.
Exactly.
And it shows in the company. And so now how does that relate to hiring outside? I think that the problem is you get a company, let's use Smith & Wesson. I mean, for 150 years, it was run by gun people. I mean, these people, they were passionate gun people. They were gun owners. They were shooters. They respected the industry. They respected their customers, all amazingly. I knew those people. I knew a lot of those people. And then one day, they decided that to be modern, we're going to hire outside of the industry. And what's interesting is that, and I'm not going to use Smith & Wesson anymore after that, but what's interesting is that it rarely works. One CEO they brought in, I think, came from the oil industry, and these are all really nice people. I've met a lot of them, and they're smart and they know all about what they used to do. DeWalt Tool Company or Maytag washing machines, and there's no doubt that they grew that company, but most of them aren't shooters. And you can always tell because you'll see in the press release photo, they'll be holding a shotgun, with a with a bird dog behind them, and you can tell that they're just awkward. It's like not really, because you can tell someone who's doing a high Sabrina. But, right?
Yeah.
Versus someone who's holding a gun like it looks like that they've probably held a lot of guns.
Exactly.
A lot of guns. And so they bring these people into the industry, and a lot of times it's prompted when a company goes public because now they have stockholders, and so now they have to show profits and dividends. And there's a juxtaposition there because it's not so much about the passion of shooting and guns and all that as it becomes profit margin, and growing the dividend wealth.
Yep.
And
go ahead, finish.
Well, no, I just see, I've only seen one or two people make the transition. One who did wonderfully is Tom Taylor, who is now, I think, the VP of marketing and everything else at SIG. Smith & Wesson first hired him. I think Tom came from Pepsi, right? And I was on an industry hunt with him when he first came over, and I've become friends with Tom. I respect him a huge amount. And so we were on this hunt. We're driving around in the hunt car and stuff, and he's telling me, well, at Pepsi this and at Pepsi that, and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And Tom wasn't really a shooter, and so I just told him, I said, you need just rein it in until you learn the industry, until you become a shooter, until you. And so I got him hooked up with Clint Smith. We went to Thunder Ranch. He did some things, and then after a little while, I mean, he basically told me, he says, you people like you are right. You can't just because you sold cell phones. This is not a commodity. This is a passion for people. Yeah. And a washing machine isn't a passion. Like, people don't go to the washing machine show. You know what I mean? We go to the gun show if we want, right?
I never thought of it that way, but you're absolutely totally correct.
Well, yeah. And I think
the biggest washing machine show east of the Mississippi. No.
Do you need one with digital backup, or would you want the, it's like, I don't know, man, I just want a washing machine that works, and whatever the cheap one is, but the gun stuff is it's a passion for us. And so too many of these people are so used to dealing with commodities. I have to sell 1.2 million cell phones this year. What's the best way to do that?
Yeah.
Right. And you see it in the gun companies. You see them firing out SKUs where you think, what another one? Let's concentrate on the core product line. Let's cater to the, your customer, do that kind. Some people can do that, but there was a terrible time in Smith & Wesson in the 80s because it was called the gun of the week. And they were just cranking out all these guns, and quality control went to hell. And that was the beginning of kind of that thinking. So there's a lot more to say about that, but that is something that's happening in the industry, and it's happening now in the industry more and more and more, because a lot of the legacy companies that have been around for 100 years they're aging out. All the people in the company who had been in the company since the early years have all aged out. And a lot of the younger people who come in have lost all that institutional knowledge from the past. And so those companies slowly morph into Motorola, and they lose that focus of who their customer is and what our passions are.
Yep.
And I know everybody, you have to make a living, you have to be profitable, but, you have to also understand.
Yeah. And, like you said, that especially for the founders of these companies, a lot of times the profit is kind of incidental. They've got to make enough to keep doing what they do, but they're really in it for the love. And that's what you start seeing go away sometimes, is the passion that the founders have for the product and shooting in general. And like you said several times, commodities, as you said, washing machine, a cell phone, Pepsi, they're commodities. And guns are not. And I've got a friend that often makes the distinction, and he kind of means this in a slightly different sense, but he says, our industry is full of enthusiasts, not professionals. And he's absolutely right. But in this particular topic we're talking about, that's where I think it's critical. If you don't get it, if you don't have the passion, you don't have the insight for what shooting is, you're going to have a hard time. And generally it's flameoutville. And we've seen that quite a bit where, how many times, Roy, even in my relatively brief tenure here, we see the press release, we're hiring the new CEO or VP of whatever, and he's come from DeWalt, and he's going to do this and that, and then he quietly goes away. So they oftentimes don't make it.
Well, you brought up a good point in that when you use that passionate legacy owner, he retires, he dies, he sells to an investment group. A lot of times the employees are still those enthusiasts, and I've seen the loss of enthusiasm, the destruction of morale, when they brought someone from outside of the industry in, and it's destructive, There was a friend of mine that I knew, and he was in public relations in the industry for decades, very well respected, and he retired. So he went to work as a consultant, and one of these investment groups had bought an optics company, scope maker, and they hired him to consult with them about, okay, what do we need to do in this industry? So far, so good. And so they flew him to New York right? Because that's where the corporate headquarters is for this investment group. And he said, so I went in there and I'm around this table with these guys and they're all joking and laughing, and smoking cigars. And it was just like a movie scene,
Yeah.
And he said, my friend said, they asked him, give us an overview. He said, so I told them who their customer is, what they expect from a company. And he said that the CEO of the company said, well, that's all and good. These are just a bunch of rednecks. We're going to tell them what they need. We'll price it cheap enough that they'll just buy it. And, we don't have to worry about any of that kind of stuff. And my friend said, I looked at him, I said, if that's really the way you feel about this, then I can't work for you. And
Excellent.
He got up and he left.
Yep.
And he let go with a, $20,000 consulting contract because of that. But that's the stuff you and I have seen. And you brought up another good point. And this is almost invariably the case, is that this started, really late 90s, but more in the early 2000s when these started really bringing people in from outside. And that's when these companies had reached a point to where original owners were selling them. Second generations were deciding they want to modernize and expand. And so they were reaching outside for these people that, my God, he worked for Pepsi Cola. That's a $10 billion company. Then I want to be like Pepsi Cola, except you're not selling Pepsi, right? And these people come into the industry thinking that they're selling Pepsi or whatever it is. But what we see, though, is that they'll hire somebody, and a lot of these, like I said before, they're really nice guys. You can have dinner with them, and they're very nice. A lot of them are really patronizing, though. They're like, oh, how cute. You have this.
Oh, you're a shooter, are you?
Yeah, and we are a really small industry. I mean, compared to anything. That's why I always laugh when the anti-gun people want to sue the industry for billions of dollars. I don't think there's that $1 billion in the entire industry if we sold everything that everybody owned.
Yeah.
So they bring these people in, and there's always a press release, and then they come in, and usually the people quit, and then other people get fired. And then this person usually brings their own people in, which is not uncommon, right? But now what's he doing? At the top end of a company who have been historically run by legacy owners and, second generation people are suddenly now staffed with people who don't know anything about the industry and who've come in from outside and consequently don't have a lot of personal relationships, don't have any of that kind of stuff. Because, see, they're used to just like, well, they need to stock Pepsi, so they're going to buy Pepsi from us.
Yeah.
But Joe's Guns doesn't have to buy Ruger, know, and so you have to treat them well. But so what we see is that, okay, you get the CEO and he'll come in and he's going to take the company to new levels of historic sales in the industry. And that he authorizes products that are stupid, that have no bearing on reality, because all his consultants that he brought in said that this is what the market wants, and here's our study that shows what the market wants. And so then what happens is that it tanks the company, and and the shooters are quick to not like something like that, right? Boycott Smith & Wesson because they put the Hillary lock on the side, So you don't want to mess with our customers, our industry.
Yep.
They are a unified front generally. Anyway, so now what happens is this CEO gets laid off or fired, and they get
a golden parachute.
They get a golden handshake. So, well, you completely dicked up our company, and so here's $5 million for you to leave, right? And so then two things happen. Hopefully, they go back to whatever industry they came from, after wreaking havoc in our industry. But often what happens, and this is especially with marketing managers and marketing directors, is that they'll do the same thing. They'll hire somebody from outside the industry, come in, he'll completely miss the whole point of marketing in our industry. We've all seen it. You guys, the customers, our listeners have all seen this. It's like, what are they thinking with this ad? Know? And they do a terrible job, and so they give them the golden handshake. And then another company needs a marketing director or a CEO, right?
Yep.
And who are in the same boat. That's this company. And so they look, and this guy shows up at the door with his resume in hand. Oh, I was a vice president of marketing at Pepsi Cola. I was vice president of marketing at Remington. We all know where Remington is now. Maybe he had another, because usually they'll be vice president at a big company, then vice president at a slightly smaller company, and then vice president at a slightly smaller company, right, in our industry. Yeah. But to the person who's, this might be third generation at this other company who's looking for a big name marketing director, they're going to look and say, Pepsi, Smith & Wesson, Remington, my gosh, this guy is really...
They've got a pedigree.
He knows what he's doing,
Yeah.
Not... And so they hire him, and he screws everything up there for a year, and then they lay him off or fire him, and then he usually does it 2 or 3 more times before they disappear from the industry. Yep. And there are successes, absolutely, positively, and Tom Taylor, he's a wonderful man. He's done amazing things in the industry. He started HAVA, the Honored American Vets Afield. Is passionate about it. He's driven that program for, 15 years or so or more. What he and Ron Cohn have done at SIG is absolutely astounding. So there are successes. And he told me early days, he says, I apply some things I learned from selling Pepsi. He said, but the real strength is learning the industry, learning the customers,
Yep.
and stuff like that. So I didn't mean to go on there, but
there's important stuff there, and you've seen a lot. I have too, but you're far more immersed in the industry than I could hope to be. But even in my tenure, I've seen everything you've talked about, and we've joked about it behind the scenes. And the point I was going to make is for this fascinates me, this story, Bud Light. There's a perfect example. Bud Light, if you remember back 10 years ago, was one of the greatest forces of marketing ever. They had so many iconic catchphrases and brands and all that stuff, and they were hitting on all cylinders. And frankly, especially Bud Light, I drank it, but it's essentially the same as Coors Light, as Miller Lite. It's a commodity, okay? But I drank it. I was brand loyal. But then InBev Limited, which is I believe, France-based company, bought Budweiser because the Bush family said, we've done enough. We want to go play with our horsies. So they sell to InBev. They start bringing in their people. And that's when, and it ended with the marketing director who went on a program and said, well, our drinkers are basically idiots and they don't know what's good for them, and we're gonna find a whole new audience. Well, we know how that ended, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Oh my gosh, they destroyed billions of dollars of worth just with a couple of stupid things. Granted, the transvestite influencer, that was such an insignificant part of what they do, but I think it was a perfect storm of the comments of the marketing director, and then you get that, and the third nail in the coffin was the company's completely inept way of dealing with it. Well, we love trans and we don't love trans and we love America and wave the flag and buy our beer. And it didn't work. They're still down like 30-40%. People lost their job. People in hometown USA lost their jobs because of idiots that got hired in St. Louis or maybe, in Europe that didn't understand the brand, didn't understand the legacy, didn't understand the values and the passions that their people brought to it. They didn't get it, and they destroyed the company. So that's a huge example that I'm sure is going to be studied for 100 years. But we see the same kind of thing in the gun world when you bring in those folks that don't get it, don't have the passion, don't have the background, don't have the enthusiasm. So the thing I haven't quite figured out, and I'm sure you've pondered this, is companies typically go from the founder, passionate guy, started in his garage, built it into a multi-million-dollar company. The son and daughter take it over the company. He retires. It does pretty good. It's growing. Things are good. And then that person steps away, and they'll either sell to venture capital, which is my third point. We'll talk about in a minute. but a lot of times it goes to the grandkids. And that's when the train wreck occurs. And my own belief is, and again, there are success stories you can point to, but I think mostly it's, as you've identified, Roy, they aren't immersed in it. They don't get it. They're just collecting the dividend check, and they don't really want to be bothered with it. So, I mean, is that pretty much how you see it?
I know third generation owners of companies in this industry who have never fired a gun. And it shows. A lot of them are accessory makers, and yes, some of the accessories in our industries could be almost commodity in the sense that you can go to Kmart and buy T-shirts.
Yeah.
And so they're cleaning gear, patches, or I don't know, not to disparage those makers, but the iconic brands in the industry it's so dangerous to lose track of who your core customer is. And when you have brought people from outside of the industry now we've got, 4 or 5 generations of that have occurred. They're like kind of so far out there. And then the real challenge, and I've seen this before, is that when they go to hire more people, they tend to default to the headhunter who hires from outside of the industry.
Yeah.
And that's where, there's a couple people, Headhunters Northwest, I think is one. She hires Shailene. I know her.
Yep.
And I have actually helped her. I directed people to her that she could place. But she understands that. And so she always reaches deep in the industry to find people, like hidden talent somewhere.
Yeah. And
because a lot of times these people, they don't understand. They don't look at this person who says, well, he doesn't have a college degree, in marketing, and so I shouldn't hire him. But nobody has 32 years of frontline experience in the industry and knows more about this than anybody you could ever bring in from outside the industry. Those people sometimes have trouble putting placed where they should be placed.
Yeah.
I sat across from the table at a dinner. There were 4 of us, a new president of a gun company, and one of his people who he brought with him, and then one of the old school company employee, directors was there too, and me. And it's like, hey, welcome to the industry. I appreciate you having dinner with me. I just wanted to get to know you a little bit, and tell me, and he was a little patronizing with me. He was a little like, how quaint that I'm here talking with this fellow. And he had no idea who American Handgunner and Guns Magazine was, and so he said, well, but how they've been doing business right now is 19th century. And so, I'm going to bring this company up into the, 21st century where it needs to be. And I will show them how we need to be marketing our products to these shooters out here. And I just, I was speechless, and because I have sat across some people like that who would say, Mr. Huntington, it's a pleasure to meet you. Yeah. When I knew that I was going to have dinner with you, I made sure that I read some of your magazines, and I talked to people who knew you, and they said that I should respect your opinion in the industry. And here's my challenges after taking over this company. And, what do you recommend, and how do you think we could partner in order to help us both move forward? It's like, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I will bend all the way over backwards to help this person, and I know that he's probably, or she is going to be around. Right. Yeah. And that's who Tom Taylor was. That's who Tom Taylor was and is. But the other times, though, it's like you meet him and I'm shaking his hand and I'm thinking, not only am I wasting my time here, although I'm getting a nice steak and a glass of wine, but this guy is not going to be the president of fill in the blank company a year from now.
Yep.
And it virtually always works out like that.
Yep. And, I got to say that I'm kind of doing my walk down memory lane in the going on 8 years I've been here. one of the biggest changes for me, and you and I talked about it, Roy, and I was flying in to have lunch with a CEO, and you gave me some advice and, said, be ready to talk about venture capital, interest rates, borrowing, and, all that business stuff. Because he said, that's what they talk about. But I also learned that the gun company CEOs that I know are going to do well at some point, whether it's small talk or whatever, you mentioned, oh, that's a, nice muley on the wall. Well, there I was, and they start doing that. So you can tell right away they're gun folks. And then they'll get back to, well, anyway, we're in discussing with a bond trader, so
Yep.
I love meeting with those guys because, I enjoy the business side of it. And it's interesting to hear the problems. They face problems on a scale you and I don't dream of. But then again, you can tell when they're shooters and hunters at heart because, like I said, they'll slide out of their chair and start, well, there I was, and then I peeked through the bushes, and he was, the guide said, and those guys and gals are just wonderful folks. But if they only want to talk about the portfolio and the CFO and we'll see how long they last, and they tend not to. So
if you pick an engineer in any industry, the passionate, successful engineers were doing what they're doing now when they were kids.
Exactly. That's a good point.
If you get a guy who designs airplanes now and works for Boeing, he was flying radio-controlled airplanes that he built when he was 14 years old.
And he's a private pilot and owns 2 airplanes.
Somebody was just talking to me about this the other day, and I asked him. We were talking about something in the industry, and I can't remember, that it was like high end and fancy, and we were concerned about people losing contact with reality. And he said it's the same reason why 20,000-hour airline pilots who drive a bus every day on the weekends fly a tail dragger Cessna. He said because they want to get back to stick and rudder. And I think this industry needs CEOs who know how to do stick and rudder and who are passionate about it. Which means, I remember I went to one vice president of marketing of a company's house one time. We had left the factory, and he said, well, stop by the house. I got a few things I want to show you. So we get to his house, and we get in the garage, and he had a lathe and a milling machine in his garage. And there was gun stuff everywhere. And he excitedly showed me things that he had ideas, and he was working on it. And now he wasn't in research and development. He wasn't in, engineering, but he was passionate, and frankly, it showed in the company. I think it's really important.
Yep. So let's get to the third leg of this stool. And this can be a short discussion because I don't think there's a lot of good things to say, but venture capital, and I'll lump private equity into that equation. And frankly, I'd never really had a discussion about that before I became the editor of Guns, but that's such an important thing nowadays. Basically, the way to the true holy grail of massive profitability is your Acme blaster company needs to be in all the big box stores. And the way you're going to do that is invite a venture capital firm in to drop $50 million or $100 million on you. And you sign the paperwork, and now I've got all this money, and we're going to be in Bass Pro and Walmart and all that. And what happens? Well, and this is not just a gun industry thing, because I've seen it in the media industry very much so, is at some point that bill comes due. And then what happens? And whenever I see a press release that so-and-so has arranged for $50 million in venture capital, it's like the odds of that company being around in 2 or 5 years are slim and none. So, and I get it. If my granddad willed me the Master Blaster company and I had no desire to be in the gun business, you get private equity or venture capital coming in and say, hey, here's $100 million. We'll buy it from you. Okay, I can go buy an island now. And that will always be the end of a company too. So your thoughts on that? I know that's kind of high level business stuff, but it is so common. Like I said, in the media world, venture capital comes in, buys your company. Well, good luck with that. Same thing in the gun business.
one of the most distressing things I've seen over the decades that I've been in this industry is that as these companies grow and then the leadership at the top becomes more distilled, so there's less and less of our core, knowledge, beliefs, passion, feeling of commitment, dedication. It becomes more diluted, is I think the best word I can say. We also lose contact with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's really interesting. My favorite thing to do is work with individual startup companies, small companies, medium companies, the people who are still sort of call it first and second generation,
Yeah.
Because they are that guy you talked about. Oh, that muley? Oh, let me tell you about it, right? They're still, I mean, they'll do business on a handshake. They'll trust your judgment that they should buy this ad, and you just reach a point to where it's like some of the big companies, it's like dealing with Pepsi or Coca-Cola. I don't know who to call at Pepsi if I wanted to talk about public relations.
Yeah.
And I'm embarrassed to say there are major companies in this industry who I have no idea who I should be dealing with there.
Yeah.
And it would not have been like that 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I've told the story a couple of times, and I won't name the name, but I'm sure the industry insiders can figure out who I'm talking about. There's one big company, and it's publicly traded. And let me preface this by saying I don't think I'm that important in the grand scheme of things, but our brand really is. And when I met with their new marketing director, it was kind of that same thing of, oh, who are you? Oh, how quaint. And I'm like, we represent a pretty significant piece of our industry, and I don't expect him to fall to the floor and kiss my shoelaces, but just his dismissive attitude. And I've said this company, we should be doing a lot more work with them, but it's like dealing with the Bureau of Motor Vehicles. And I will say our Indiana Bureau of Motor Vehicles is head and shoulders above this company, because when I reach out to them, when I occasionally think, okay, let's try and build this partnership, sometimes they don't even answer emails. Now, how rude is that? In a business sense. And it's like, okay, if that's how you're going to be, so we'll see if they're still around. The only reason they're around now is because they're over 100 years old.
Right. Well, there are companies in this industry who are bigger companies, $10 million companies, or something like that. And bigger, who, if I call, for instance, the owner will call me back. Or if I send the marketing people an email, I'll get a return email from the founder of the company.
Yeah.
And so people are funny. They say, oh, it seems like you only have friends that you like in the magazine. And it's like, well, you know what? We show the people who are interested enough to work with us.
Yeah.
And if they're not there, I'll wind my side of this up with, these are the guys we need in this industry. I had dinner one night 30 years ago, right, with this guy, and he was in his late 70s, which at the time I thought, oh, you're really an old guy, but I'm kind of like, yeah, okay. People are going to tell this story about me, right?
Yeah.
And so we were talking about business, because I always used to say, well, what have you done? What do you do? What do you think about this? Should we use distributors or, reps? Or, we were all talking. So this guy had been a manufacturer multiple times, a dealer, owned gun stores and stuff multiple times, had been a wholesaler multiple times, right? He'd been in the industry like 52 years, had done marketing, you name it. He had done it in the industry. As a matter of fact, he was importing a kind of a Glock clone 22 pistol from Germany at the time. And I guess it was probably, 30 years ago. And he loaded his trunk with these, and he stopped at dealers on the way to the SHOT Show and sold the guns out of his trunk, right? In order to finance his SHOT Show trip, And he was a passionate salesman. So we were talking about what's the best way to do business in the industry. And I said, if you're a manufacturer, should you have dealer direct? Should it be two tiers? Should you go through a distributor and let them deal with the dealers? What do you think? Should you have rep groups or not? So how do you think is the best way to do business? And he was so funny. He was sipping on a little thing of bourbon, and he said, so you're asking me, what do I think is the best way to do business in our industry? And I said, yes. And he took a sip, he looked at me, and he said, any way you can. And
there you go.
I know. And I went, I just got Business 101, from a guy who has been in the trenches, and would I want this guy to be part of my company? Probably, because he's seen everything. Yep. And, that's what we have less and less of that in the industry.
Yeah. I
want to go out on a positive thing here too, which is that a lot of people will disparage young people in the industry. If we subscribe to all the wires, the outdoor wire, the digital wire, and all those wires, it's a resource for press releases in our industry. And over the years, it was people that looked like me are now the VP of marketing at the, and now I see those faces are getting younger and younger and younger and younger and younger.
Yeah.
Here Brittany something is now the assistant marketing director at this little company. And a lot of people would discount them until when they started to show up, and I would go to the SHOT Show, and I found out that actually a lot of these are young, but they're enthusiasts. And all they need is the knowledge.
Yeah.
And so as long as they have the mentors in the industry, it'll work. But if she goes to work for a company whose new CEO came from selling washing machines, I think there's the disconnect.
Yeah.
Crash. So we need to be careful out there, boys and girls. Yeah.
Well, to wrap this thing up, a couple of thoughts I wanted to make is, number one, this is not the kind of discussion you're going to have at many of our friends in the gun media. So my question is, does the audience like this? I guarantee you we'll get some commentary from our friends in the industry, but is this something that interests your rank and file shooters? I would think so, because it affects what you will and won't see on the shelf in the future. But leave us a comment or drop us an email. I'd like to know if this is valuable to you when we kind of talk inside baseball. And I would also say it is important to you, the rank and file shooter, because these companies actually do listen, some better than others. But if they're doing something you don't like, let them know. Don't just say, that's the way it is. Especially a big outcry when they really screw up. Some famous ones, they listen. So let folks know, and tell them when they're doing a good job too. And for the folks in the industry, you know exactly who we're talking about, and I hope you don't make those same mistakes. But we gave you the 3 quick steps to destroy your shooting company or your firearms business. So let us know what you think about that. So, Roy, thanks again for joining us, and again, having a talk that I don't think you're going to find anyplace else, because especially your experience in the business, but it's, I think, important stuff, because we're all part of the gun industry, regardless of where we sit. So thanks for joining us, and we'll meet again on the Guns Magazine podcast. Well, it was great talking to Roy, and hopefully there's somebody in the gun industry that will take our advice to heart and maybe save a great company from going down in flames. Before we go, a couple quick housekeeping notes. Of course, make sure you stop by fmgpubs.com. That's where you can buy subscriptions to Guns Magazine and American Handgunner, and you can buy our latest books like Roy's Insider and John Connor's Odd Angry Shot. That's fmgpubs.com. Of course, make sure you stop by our websites, too. You can read most of our content there. That would be American Handgunner Magazine at AmericanHandgunner.com and AmericanCop.com. It's not just for law enforcement professionals. It's for folks that just want to be prepared when things go sideways. And, of course, GunsMagazine.com. I'm a little partial to Guns Magazine, and it's a really good website. So check those out when you got a spare moment. And, of course, we need to acknowledge our great new sponsor, ArmsCore.
The new STK from Rock Island Armory. Experience the power and precision of the Rock today. For more info, visit armscore.com.
Well, that's it for this episode of the Guns Magazine podcast. On behalf of everybody who works so hard here at FMG Publications, I am Guns Magazine editor Brent Wheat, reminding you yet again, now get out there and get shooting.